Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Kristen Lillyman, and I'm an engagement specialist with Dillon Consulting. I will be your third-party facilitator for this evening. We have been working with the city to coordinate and facilitate the engagement for the Municipal Comprehensive Review, or as you may know it, our Plan Toronto. Many of you have likely participated or attended meetings with us and the city in the past on the official plan in the fall or in recent meetings on environment climate change policies that were in April or the draft vision and directions that were in May and earlier this month in June. This is a policy themed meeting to dive a little bit deeper on a specific topic. Tonight, the focus is on neighborhoods and complete communities. And we did hold a meeting last night on employment lands and the future of work. And we're also having a session tomorrow evening on housing and intensification. So go to the next slide. So I'll start tonight with a land acknowledgement. The City of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The city also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Acknowledging the land that we are on is only a small piece of recognizing the contributions and history of Indigenous peoples and our ongoing learning and progress towards reconciliation. It is also important to recognize that the Indigenous connection and history with the land that we now call Toronto, as well as Lake Ontario, dates back at least 10,000 years. A key part of this project, our Plan Toronto, is and has been the integration of and amplification of Indigenous voices, perspectives, history, and understandings as part of this process. Next slide. So the agenda for tonight will include a background and refresher on the official plan and the draft vision statement and directions. It will also include a focus on neighborhoods and complete communities, including the Expanding Housing Options in Neighborhoods initiative. We'll have time for questions and discussion between each section, as you can see on the agenda on your screen. We will then share some next steps with you and wrap up the meeting by 7 p.m. tonight. Next slide. So we'll start with a few introductions of who is in the meeting today. So we're joined today by those from the city who are leading the official plan, and that includes Jeff Cantos, who I will now ask to introduce the city team.
Thanks, Kristen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and welcome, and thanks for joining us. There's about 40 of you here, so hopefully everyone's keeping cool. Like Kristen said, my name is Jeff Cantos. I'm the city's manager of the official plan team, and I'm joined by a number of city staff. And I'll just ask them to wave so you when they chat when you see their name in the chat, you'll know the face who's chatting to you. Jenny, Jason, and Jerry are from the official plan team. Dan is on the MTSA team, and Philip and Lillian are joined with us from the Expanding Housing Options in Neighborhoods group that, again, will be able to answer your questions in the chat. And obviously, if you put up your hand later on during the Q&A period. Again, thanks a lot for joining us. Kristen, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So from Dillon Consulting with me this evening, we also have Ying Yi and Ish Chowdhury, who will be helping manage this meeting behind the scenes, including taking meeting minutes of the conversation that we have this evening. So I'd also love to welcome participants to introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know who is with us today, and you can also get to know each other. So next slide, just do a bit of housekeeping. So please remain muted when you are not talking. If you do have a question or a comment, please use the raise hand function or type your question into the chat box. There will be dedicated discussion points throughout the presentation to address questions, as we saw in the agenda. So please, if you are raising your hand, introduce yourself before asking the question. This meeting, as you may have noticed, is being recorded today, but we will only post the presentation component on the Our Plan Toronto webpage. The comments and questions and discussion that happens here today will be used for note-taking purposes only. So a little bit of a note on my role as meeting facilitator for today. My job is to manage the discussion and make sure that everyone gets a chance to be heard. And to ensure that everyone is able to participate, we ask that you think about and raise the question you most want to be answered. We do strongly suggest that you be brief as possible and as direct as possible, and please stick to one question per person when you're asking the question, and you will be held accountable to that. If you don't get your question answered live, there is a Q&A that is included in our engagement records on the Our Plan website. And we will post the presentations and the meeting minutes, and as well as the video clip of the presentation on that website following the meeting. Next slide. So again, we do welcome your questions and discussion. There are no bad questions. Chances are, if you're thinking it, someone else is as well. We do want to hear from everyone. We believe that everyone has wisdom and experience to share. On that note, there will likely be differences in opinion, but everyone, again, deserves to be heard. Just try to be respectful and listen to others' viewpoints. The city is here today to listen to your thoughts, your feedback, your perspectives. So please don't be shy to share them. Next slide. So just a note, as Jeff mentioned, the chat box will be available throughout the meeting. And we are encouraging the use of that chat box to share ideas and get to know each other, ask questions. The City of Team and our Dillon team will be monitoring the chat and will try to respond to questions when they can. They will also be adding links there when we're talking about certain items. They'll send links in the chat that you can investigate further. So just a reminder to be respectful in the chat. We want to keep it active, but if there are disrespectful or abusive comments, we will have to close the chat. Next slide. So why are we all here tonight on this hot night? Well, city staff are going to provide an overview of the official plan, the draft official plan vision and directions, and our team is also going to share the city's housing options in neighborhoods initiative with you tonight. And we want to hear your feedback, so we'll open it up to questions and dialogue. We're also going to share some next steps with you and how you can continue to be engaged. Next slide. So this slide provides just a quick snapshot of the overall project process. The project initially launched in May 2021, and we've gone through parts 1, vision and priorities, and parts 2, asking big questions and setting policy directions. And during that time, the city and the Dillon engagement team were doing a lot of listening. And that has been through public meetings, youth engagement, online engagement and surveys, meetings with Indigenous rights holders and organizations, and through a community leader circle. We're now at the point in part 3 where the city has created draft policies. And we continue to meet with people and organizations to discuss our Plan Toronto. So far in phase 3, we've held a variety of meetings, including the meetings on the draft environment and climate change policies, and a series of meetings on the draft vision and directions and principles. And then we've held these 3 focused policy-themed meetings, which are all leading to a report on July 5th to Planning and Housing Committee. We will have some additional engagement after July 5th, including more engagement on the draft vision and directions for the official plan. So stay tuned for those updates as well. Next slide. So this is just a bit of an overview slide of the engagement to date. So in part 1, part 2, and so far in part 3, we have held over 75 meetings and met with over 2,300 people. And that's been including internal and external stakeholders, organizations, companies, and residents. This work has included a focus on reaching often underrepresented populations and the groups that work with them. So that has included such things as Indigenous rights holders and Indigenous organizations, youth, and that was done through schools and school boards, seniors through the Seniors Roundtable, and we held some focused conversations, like on accessibility and in specific geographies like Scarborough. We also had an online component to our engagement and the RPlan website and our story maps, which will be linked in the chat shortly. That is an online resource to explore more information and maps and data related to RPlan Toronto. And they have received over 10,000 visits. Next slide. So our team has taken all of this input we've received to date, and we've put it into some key themes. So the cross-cutting themes, the themes that you see on the left of your screen there, those are themes that came forward across every meeting in different organizations and groups, different communities, and with Indigenous organizations. And what emerged were a few themes, but one was equity, inclusion, and relationship building. And that included addressing inequities across the city, be more inclusive, reflect the diversity of the city, require universal and accessible design, community-led solutions. That's a call to work collaboratively with communities, especially when it came to big change in neighborhoods and big development. Learn from the past and implementation. So come to a project with an understanding of the history of the communities and a history of the issues. Aligning priorities and conversations. So trying to get everyone on the same page, and that included alignment with leadership. The other themes on the right side of your screen are themes in the darker green. They were themes that were raised the most frequently discussed issues. And things that came about were housing affordability and the scale of intensification. So that's part of our discussion tomorrow evening. Environment and climate change. Jobs, that was particularly heightened through COVID. Safety for all communities, and complete communities. So that's where everybody would like to see a neighborhood that needs a complete communities approach and universal design. And complete communities is obviously the subject matter of our theme tonight. So next slide. So now we're going to have an engagement moment, and we'll have a couple of these throughout tonight. So we'll go to the next slide, and you can see the instructions on how to participate. So you can go to www.menti.com, or you can scan the QR code that is on the screen using your smartphone and in your camera app, and you click the link once you're prompted. But once you can access the website from your desktop browser or from your smartphone, and you'll enter the code that is on the screen. So the code is 86085607. And you can get onto that website. We have some questions for you to get us started tonight and to learn a little bit about the audience and who is here with us today. If you are having any difficulties, please feel free to mention that in the chat, and you could also answer their questions in the chat if you aren't able to access it. But we'll go to the poll now. So we'll see the live polling results from the questions that we will be posing. So the first question is, where are you participating from? So we have, seems to be representation from across the city so far, with the majority in Toronto East York. So if you haven't had a chance to get in to menti.com, you can see the address at the top of the screen here. It says menti.com, and there's a code as well on the top of the screen, just in case you missed it on the other slide. And there's also a link in the chat if you want to access it and haven't been able to yet. So still seeing some numbers roll in here, but we have people from Etobicoke, North York, Toronto East York, Scarborough, and a couple outside of Toronto as well. Great, so maybe we'll go to the next question. So this is a question, as I outlined earlier, we've had a lot of engagement to date for this project, Our Plan Toronto. So we're wondering, have you participated in other Our Plan Toronto engagement activities before? As I mentioned, there's been engagement since May 2021, including meetings in the fall and in the spring, and a variety of other ways that people have engaged. So many of you are joining us you've been on this engagement before, so that's great. Welcome back. And some of you this is your first meeting with us, so welcome and thanks for joining us. Maybe we'll go to the next question. So this is for those 20-something people who said, yes, I have participated before. How did you previously participate with us before? And you can select all of the answers that apply here. Did you attend a citywide virtual meeting, another type of virtual meeting like a stakeholder meeting, completed an online survey? Are you a member of the Community Leaders Circle via website or that social media, so online, or visited the story map that is up on the Our Plan website? So many of you have participated in some meetings and also online. And also we have 2 members of the Community Leader Circle with us this evening. Okay, great. So we'll go to the next question, just a couple more questions here. So this is more about understanding the participants tonight and the understanding and the level of familiarity you have with the Toronto official plan. So how familiar are you with it, all the way from not at all to extremely familiar? So many of you so far are sitting kind of in the middle range between slightly and very. A couple not at all, and not to worry. Right after these questions, we're going to get into a bit of an official plan refresher that Jeff will provide. And so you'll learn a little bit about this document. But many of you are moderately familiar with it. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So this is if you do currently use, probably for those who are familiar with the official plan, how do you currently use it? So are you using it as a resident, as a member of a group or organization, for work, as a student for education, other, and not sure? And for those who are saying other, you can feel free to add in the chat on how you're currently using it. So many people are here this evening that use it as a resident and as a member of a group or for work. Great. So that is the last question for this segment, but we will have a few other polls throughout the evening. So leave that app open because we will be asking you for some feedback later and input on future engagement. So if we go back to the slideshow, I am going to hand it over to Jeff to provide that overview and the background on the official plan and the draft vision.
Thanks, Kristen. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this slide shows where we are. The city of Toronto with a population, I believe it's now over 2.8 million. And we're nestled into the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, the map in the middle, with our neighboring municipalities, with a population of over 10 million, which then again is nestled into the province of Ontario, which has a population nearing 15 million. Next slide, please. And the next slide, this slide shows us that the planning system within which we work also has this nestling nature. And at the top are the matters of provincial interests. So the province sets out the rules that we municipalities work with. So for example, the Planning Act is the legislation that allows municipalities to do the things that we do in terms of land use planning. There's a provincial policy statement that's set out, and this statement is set out for all the municipalities within Ontario. And then the next rung is regional growth. And so the province sets out regional plans. For example, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe area. Again, that's that map that was in the middle. And there's also a Greenbelt plan. And there's other regional plans as well across the province. And nestled into the middle is the citywide vision. So each municipality is required by the Planning Act to have an official plan that sets out the long-term citywide vision. And that's what we're going to talk about later today. And nestled within official plans for the City of Toronto are area priorities. There are secondary plans, local that result from local area studies. Sometimes they're called precinct plans, and more often than not, they are encased in the official plan. And from there, when you go one rung lower, there is an area-specific implementation. So the city, we have a zoning bylaw, and there are some area-specific zoning bylaws as well for neighborhoods and communities. And then right at the right on the ground, there is a site-specific precision. So there are zoning bylaw standards for specific sites, for specific buildings that, for example, might require the specific number of parking spots for a development or bicycle parking spots. So again, that's kind of the nestling planning system within which we work. Next slide, please. So that middle level, the official plan, that's the city document that acts as Toronto's roadmap for land use matters into the future. So the province, through the growth plan, again, the regional level, sets out growth forecasts for municipalities to demonstrate that we have a plan that conforms to those forecasts. So for Toronto, the minimum population forecasts is an additional minimum 700,000 people and a minimum 450,000 jobs. So we are forecasted to grow people and jobs by the province. And so this exercise that we're undertaking is a review of the official plan to demonstrate to the province who is the approval authority of this, what's called the Municipal Comprehensive Review. We're undertaking this review of the official plan. Again, it's our document that sets our long-term vision, the shared values, and the policies that help guide decision-making as well. Next slide, please. So on the slide, it shows the official plan that we are reviewing. We're doing it in a phased manner. And so the official plan has various chapters with policies in them. One of the chapters that we'll be talking about today is the land use designations in terms of neighborhoods. So on the bottom right is the land use designation map for the city. And on the next slide, please, we have the city on the left and the land use breakdown of the current official plan that states that 75% of the city is not expected to accommodate much growth, but will mature, whereas 25% will accommodate most of the growth for 30 years to 2030. Now, the plan that we are the review that we're required to take is to a planning horizon to 2051. So previously, the official plan, the time horizon that we're reviewing was 2030. So we're looking forward and projecting and forecasting out to 2051. So the plan that we're reviewing on the right, if you were to take a hypothetical city block, turn the city into a hypothetical city, 100 city blocks, you'll see that about 19% of the city are roads to which there are no land use designations in the official plan. About 35% of the city is neighborhoods. They're in the middle. And about 13% are what we call core employment areas and general employment areas. And just over 5% of the city are what are designated as mixed use areas. Next slide, please. And I'm going to talk about the official plan draft vision for 2051, the vision statement, and the proposed directions that we are consulting on tonight. And we're going to continue the engagement throughout the course of the fall, September, October, November, and hopefully come to council upon them coming back post their election in early new year for a final revised new first chapter of the official plan. So these are the 2051 vision statements that we drafted based on the engagement that Kristen talked about that we undertook over the last year or so. Next slide, please. So this graphic kind of just encapsulates all the ingredients visually of what I'm just going to talk about. Um, one of the new directions that we would like to take the official plan into is Indigenous planning perspectives. So I'm not going to get into that in detail, but at the moment, what our proposal was that Planning and Housing Committee considered was that the official plan would start with the importance of land acknowledgements. We start them at the beginning of city meetings, but someone who opens the official plan should understand why they're important, that it's a moment of reflection, and a slew of other really important reasons. And in the beginning of the official plan, talk about the importance of amplifying Indigenous engagement, early, often, and respectful engagement, as well as amplifying Indigenous voices. And the other directions and principles I'll talk about in the next slide, please. So for the 2051 vision statement, that again, this is draft, we want to hear your thoughts on them. There are three key vision statements for 2051 that the official plan should seek to eliminate disparities experienced by Torontonians. The official plan should prioritize climate change action and sustainability towards net zero by 2040. And the official plan should be the roadmap for Toronto to become the most inclusive city in the world. And I'll take you through each of these. Next slide, please. So the first one, the official plan seeking to eliminate disparities experienced by Torontonians. So what do we mean when we say eliminating disparities? So in the city, it means that we must acknowledge that the post-pandemic recovery and rebuild has to acknowledge that people with lived experience varied amongst those having, for example, the privilege to work at home, like myself, and versus those Torontonians who were deemed to be essential and required and had to take, for example, transit to work. What this also means is understanding that the systemic effects of the land use planning system within which we work should actually be challenged and look for outcome-based directions that can actually meaningfully reduce disparity. It also means building complete communities that offer support opportunities for people of all ages, abilities, to conveniently access most of the necessities for daily living, including a mix of jobs, local stores, services, and a full range of housing, including affordable housing. Next slide, please. And so prioritizing climate change action and sustainability towards net zero by 2040. This is really what it says. It's prioritizing climate change. We know that climate change is one of the biggest challenges facing our planet. And so our land use decisions should work towards achieving sustainability towards net zero by 2040. And this also includes prioritizing Indigenous worldviews and relational views of land protection around resilience. The next slide, please. The official plan being the roadmap for Toronto to become the most inclusive city in the world. So we know that development will continue to occur in the city. We are a city that will continue to grow. We're forecasted to grow, and we also know that we will be growing by a minimum of 700,000 people and 450,000 jobs by 2051. We also know that the federal government has set higher immigration targets into Canada, and we also know that Toronto has been and always will be a very, very attractive place for immigrants to settle into. So this component of our vision statement is about becoming a city that is welcoming to newcomers. Next slide, please. So how do we get there? So there's three main components that we're consulting on. And these principles of how we get there for a successful and inclusive city is about access, equity, and inclusion. So when we've talked about access, that's about improving access to many facets of daily life. Again, it's access to affordable housing, it's access to public transit, it's universal accessibility for those living with disabilities so that they can live spontaneous and safe and independent lives in the city. We heard during our engagement that the snowstorm, the really big snowstorm in February, actually people lost access and their spontaneity and their independence because they couldn't go out into the sidewalks and go to the pharmacy because the sidewalks were clogged up with snow. So that's this principle of access. The next principle of equity, and when we talk about applying an equity lens, what we mean is we as the city and city planners is about identifying and removing barriers for the city's most marginalized and vulnerable communities so that we can achieve growth that is both positive and inclusive. Finally, in terms of inclusion, this is going back to make sure that we're creating a safe and inclusive city for today's Torontonians and for us, for those of us living here and those yet to arrive. And these are, our draft principles and a vision statement that we're going to continue engaging on for the next couple of months. Again, with hopefully a draft new chapter 1 early in the new year. I think I pass it back over to you, Kristen.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So we are going to go to another Mentimeter poll and just trying to get your feedback on what you just heard from Jeff about the vision and the principles. So get your smartphone or your desktop application that you have open with Mentimeter. If you did close it, there's always the link in the chat, or you can go to menti.com and the code that's on your screen now. So we're looking to see how supportive are you of the official plan vision that Jeff outlined. And there was 3 factors there: eliminate disparities, prioritize climate action, and the goal of the most inclusive city. So it's a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree. Okay, so most so far they're having around 4.8, but you still have time to record your thoughts on this and how supportive are you of these vision objectives. And if you do have any comments about that or questions, we are going to have 10 minutes after this to discuss, and you can raise your questions and you can also put them in the chat. So I see pretty strong support for all 3, but stronger support for climate action, and then followed by eliminating disparities and most inclusive city. Okay, we'll go to the next question we have. And this is those principles that Jeff outlined, the principles of access, equity, and inclusion. And again, the same scale of how supportive are you of these principles for the official plan, from 1 to strongly agree and to 5 strongly agree. So 1 strongly disagree, 5 strongly agree. Okay, so we have between agree and strongly agree for all 3 right now. The slightly more agreement with and support for inclusion. Okay, so we'll maybe take that poll down, but thank you everyone for your participation there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen. And thanks for the opportunity to be here and present our work. So I'll just provide an overview of the EHON initiatives, and I'll be tag teaming with my colleague Phil Parker, who will be talking about the multiplex piece specifically. So when we're talking about the EHON initiative, what we're really talking about is the missing middle. There's laneway suites and garden suites. These are distinct, as you can see from the graphic, from mid-rise buildings. These are primarily low-rise buildings that we're talking about. The types of missing middle housing, these are found in many parts of Toronto today, and about 30% of Toronto residents actually live in one form of missing middle housing or another. But they are missing from the new construction. So only about 1% of new construction in the city is in these forms of housing, and EHON is looking to change that. So on the next slide, we will talk a little bit about where EHON falls on the housing spectrum. So this is the housing spectrum that shows how the city accommodates, residents of different ages, abilities, and incomes. So on the left, you'll see emergency shelters, supportive housing, and then as you move towards on the spectrum, you'll go towards the market-based housing. The yellow arrows show where EHON falls on the spectrum, and we see the Expanding Housing Options in Neighborhoods program as adding affordable rental housing and affordable and on-market rental housing, and specifically in the lower right form of that graphic there. So so you can see that is distinct from the taller buildings in the background. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the where. You've seen this official plan map many times now, I bet. I'll jump to the next slide right away, which shows that the yellow areas, which is on the next slide, is what we're talking about. These are the land designated neighborhoods. They comprise about 35% of the city's land area, as Jeff mentioned earlier. So that's the where. And now we'll talk about the why, which is on the next slide, and you can actually skip one more slide after that to just get the content. Yep. We actually have a legislative and policy basis to the work we are undertaking as part of EHON, starting with the Planning Act, which says that the official plans of municipalities shall contain policies that authorize the use of a second residential unit on a lot and a detached ancillary unit. The provincial policy statement talks about an appropriate range and mix of residential uses, including second units, affordable housing, and housing for seniors. And then the growth plan talks about complete communities, which includes a range and mix of housing options for people at all stages of life, household sizes, and incomes. On the next slide, we'll go down to the municipality with the official plan. And the EHON project is also in keeping with the official plan's broad goals to promote housing choices for all people in their communities at all stages of their lives, a full range of residential building types within lower scale buildings, in neighborhoods, and physical changes that are sensitive, gradual, and fit the existing character and the general neighborhood pattern. So that's the policy basis for our work. And on the next slide, I'll share a little bit about the scope of the project. So you can skip 2 slides, go to the scope. So I will spend a little bit of time on the slide because it does seem quite dense, and I want to take my time to explain the full scope of the work we're undertaking. So there's a number of core and aligned initiatives that are a part of the EHON umbrella. So as I mentioned, Phil will talk about the multiplex piece, but I'll talk about the rest. So the garden suites, they're detached secondary units that are smaller in size, and they're located in the backyards of the houses. The City Council adopted the Garden Suite Official Plan Amendment and Zoning Bylaw Amendment in February of 2022, but that was appealed and is currently not in force. We are currently waiting on the decision from the Ontario Land Tribunal on the motion to dismiss the appeal. The Beaches East York pilot is exploring missing middle housing on a city-owned site in Ward 19 specifically, and is being used to test where the barriers lie. So whether they be in existing zoning, on-site infrastructure, or simply the planning process. The Neighborhood Change Research undertook a historical analysis of neighborhoods across the city, and one of the key findings of that study was that areas with more permissive zoning had more stable population levels, more diverse housing types, and accommodated a greater range of incomes. And the major streets will be looking at intensification of streets along the city that intersect with lands designated as neighborhoods, and they are largely serviced by bus transit. And finally, we are also looking at adding neighborhood retail and services like grocers, coffee shops, essentially small-scale retail to serve the local community. Other components of the work include establishing a missing middle toolkit to help owners navigate the new zoning bylaws and permissions, and this would include a set of pre-approved drawings that can help reduce the cost to homeowners when planning these forms of housing on their properties. We'll also be doing monitoring work to see how the zoning bylaw is working on the ground so that staff can make adjustments if needed. In terms of identifying barriers and opportunities, we will be looking at the challenges to construct missing middle housing and whether they are parking requirements, process barriers, or financial barriers. All of these changes that we're proposing will be packaged in to official plan amendments that will be taken to City Council and Planning Housing Committee, and that will facilitate new forms of missing middle housing. At the center of all of this work is an inclusive engagement strategy where we engage not only those who presently live in neighborhoods, but also people who live outside of neighborhoods, but who want to maybe one day live in a low-rise community as well. So we call them future neighbors. So that's the scope of the initiative. And as I mentioned, yeah, again, so we'll talk about multiplexes, but I'll just go through very quickly a series of slides that show possible outcomes. So on the next slide, you'll have one more slide. This is just a demonstration of an average city block in the across Toronto. You have a major street on the left with some bus transit, and you have more interior neighborhood streets. You have your local amenities like parks, etc. On the next slide, what we show is what happens to that block when you add in missing middle housing. So you'll see local commercial in yellow, multiplexes in purple, garden suites in orange, and then along the major streets, you'll see low-rise apartment buildings. So when you unhighlight all of those changes, as you'll see on the next slide, you see that the form and character of the neighborhood remains roughly the same, but you have added about 150 units just by rough calculations into the neighborhood to accommodate new residents without changing the look and feel of the neighborhood. You still have your residential character and you still have your low-rise character, which we know and understand is important to people. So that's it for me. I'm going to pass it up to Phil at this point.
Thanks, Lillian. And you can go 2 slides ahead, please. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about multiplex housing. I, along with Melanie Melnick, who's not here today, are leading the multiplex housing study as part of EHON. And we want to start off by just kind of speaking to the guiding principles. They really build off the official plan's guiding principles and the principles of the EHON project itself. So we're really trying to strive to make sure that Toronto's neighborhoods reflect the diversity of the city of itself. We're looking to take an inclusive approach to neighborhoods in Toronto. We recognize that the neighborhoods kind of are a key part of Toronto's identity and their low-rise nature as a part of that. We recognize that people seek out neighborhoods because they're green and livable, and that's another thing that we don't want to change. So really with our project, the key thing we're trying to do is facilitate multiplexes across the city through simplified processes and policies, reduced financial barriers, and expanded permissions. Next slide, please. So just what do we mean by multiplex housing? To be very clear, what we're talking about is housing with 2, 3, or 4 units in a single building. So those are commonly referred to as a duplex, triplex, or fourplex. They're generally rentals, but they can also be small-scale condominiums. And this form of housing is not new in Toronto. This can be existing houses that have been subdivided into multiple units, or it can be purpose-built. And the photos we've shown show a range of different conversions which exist in Toronto today, and a few contemporary new builds as well. Next slide, please. So really the main crux of our proposal is to permit multiplexes in neighborhoods citywide. So the image on the left shows in yellow where multiplexes are currently permitted today. And those are in the R and RM zones, the more permissive zones of the city. And that's generally in the former city of Toronto, York, East York, with some other parts of the city also included, like South Etobicoke. But what we would like to see is multiplex permitted in neighborhoods citywide. And again, going back to that sort of inclusive, equitable approach, we would like to be able to see the city have gentle density everywhere in all of our neighborhoods in Toronto. So about and I just wanted to note as well that about 96% of homes within neighborhoods are located within walking distance of a subway, streetcar, or bus stop. And so we recognize that this kind of gentle density can be accommodated with lower impact to servicing and can utilize existing TTC transit routes as well. Next slide, please. So the concept we've been working with, we've been calling it thinking inside the box. And what we mean by that is you can fit more units within the same scale that's already permitted in the zoning. So this image, the one on the left with titled zoning envelope, there's supposed to be an arrow pointing to the box around the bungalow. And what we mean by zoning envelope, we're not trying to invent a new concept. We're just trying to show what you could build theoretically if you maximize the height and the depth and the density permissions within the existing zoning. So that bungalow you can see could add a second floor and still be within that permitted zoning. So on the picture to the right, you can see that we've modeled an addition on the back of the bungalow and split the bungalow into 3 units. This is the type of scale that we're talking about when we were looking at multiplexes throughout the city. And that's the type of scale that would be permitted today throughout the city if it was a single unit or perhaps a second unit suite, but not a third or fourth unit in most of the city. Next slide, please. One of the ways that we would like to simplify the zoning standards to eliminate barriers to multiplexes is to make sure that multiplexes are allowed to be built at the same size and scale as single unit homes. So somewhat counterintuitively, in some cases, zoning right now permits single unit homes to be larger than multi-unit homes. For example, in the R and RD zones, the maximum building depth for a single unit home is 17 meters, while multiplexes are limited to 14 meters. So we would like to make some adjustments to the zoning bylaws to make sure that multiplexes are treated in the same way as a single unit home, and to make sure that multiplexes aren't penalized for having multiple units. Next slide, please. So we do recognize that there is a diversity of built form and neighborhoods across the city of Toronto. And the way we wanted to make sure that our proposals allow for multiplexes that fit within the scale and the context of all of these different types of neighborhoods. So we've done a series of design studies. And on this slide, we're just showing the 4 building blocks of each of those studies. So in the upper left, we've chosen a typical lot size for each kind of typology in the city. We've modeled the zoning envelope, which again is the sort of height and depth and density permitted. We've modeled existing homes. And then in the 4th image, the bottom right, we've shown that the existing home, which in this case is a very large single unit home, can be split into 4 units, livable sized units under the existing zone permissions. Next slide, please. And then for these design exercises, we've taken it one step further and looked at contextual analysis in real Toronto neighborhoods using real existing buildings to show what this type of housing could look like. So this example that I'll show is Madawaska Avenue, which is just outside of North York Center. And we're looking at the bungalow in the middle of the image with the car in the parking lot. And you'll notice that in the existing image, there is a new build, or at the time, new build contemporary single family home, which was built under the existing zoning bylaw, and it's significantly larger than that bungalow. In the next slide, we've modeled what a triplex could look like next to that contemporary new build using similar scale, again, under the existing zoning permissions. And the architecture actually comes from a real proposal in the nearby in the neighborhood. So you can see from this image that it's roughly the same scale as what is permitted. In the next slide, you can see that we were able to create 3 livable sized units in the same scale as the single unit home existing. And then in the next slide, you can see that in context with the neighbors, It's the triplex we modeled is the same depth, the same width, and allows the same setbacks as the other single unit homes in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. So in our report, which will be going to Planning and Housing Committee on July 5th, we're really covering four different things. We have presented a draft official plan policy amendment to allow multiplexes in all neighborhoods. We have some recommended zoning bylaw directions. We don't have the actual zoning bylaw yet. That'll be coming later in 2023. We will outline our input into city fee structures and approval process improvements. And then we've outlined some areas for further study, which we haven't been able to get to. Either they're out of the scope or they're not really the city's responsibility. We can't amend, say, for example, the Provincial Condo Act. Next slide, please. But as I mentioned, we have already released our draft official plan amendment. So I'll just go over a few of the highlights here. Again, it permits multiplexes, or it would permit multiplexes in all neighborhoods. It ensures the continued consideration of the physical context for multiplexes are proposed, whether they're new buildings or converted houses. So again, that kind of same scale idea. It encourages the inclusion of large units with multiple bedrooms and universally accessible units on the ground floor. It directs that soft landscaping be maximized to support tree growth and an overall green character. It encourages sustainable building practices, and it contemplates using density incentives in the zoning bylaw to permit additional units, which again will come in 2023. And since we've released this, there's been a lot of questions about height regarding the OPA and whether we are intending to permit up to 4 stories citywide. And I just want to clarify that that's not the intention of this amendment. The amendment intends to defer to the zoning bylaw for each neighborhood to regulate height. So in the case of something like East York, that would mean the maximum height is 8.5 meters. If you're further downtown, that might be 10 meters, but we're not intending to modify that. We're just deferring to the policy that already exists. And that's it for multiplexes, but there's a few other EHON reports going to Planning and Housing Committee. So I'll pass it back to Lillian in case she has a few other things to say.
Thank you so much, Phil. Yeah, so as I already mentioned earlier to a previous question, there are 3 reports that are coming forward from EHON to the July 5th Planning and Housing Committee. So once again, this is the multiplex final proposals report, the neighborhood retail and services phase 1 final report, and then the major streets interim report. All of these reports do seek further direction from from Planning and Housing Committee and City Council to further engage on all of these initiatives. So we will be coming back after the elections in the fall. We'll be continuing to engage on all aspects of EHON in 2022 and into 2023 when we will be bringing forward final recommendations. If you'd like to stay engaged on the Expanding Housing Options and Neighborhoods Initiative, you can sign up for e-updates on our website, www.toronto.ca/EHON. So that is it from us. Back to you, Kristen.
But I'll hand it over to Jeff at this point to go over the next steps in this process, and then we'll do our final poll for the evening.
So really quickly, as I mentioned earlier tonight, on July 5th, Planning and Housing Committee, there'll be two reports being considered, the major transit station areas, and there's a meeting tomorrow night at between 5 and 7 about that specifically. And then I mentioned the employment policies and employment area conversions. Again, these are the things that the province requires of us to be completed. So that'll go to July 5th Planning and Housing Committee, and then to Big City Council later in July. And we're going to continue our engagement on the major transit station areas that we didn't get to in the next couple of weeks. Members of my team will continue to work on employment area conversions that we didn't get to for July, and working towards early 2023. And we will continue our Indigenous engagement with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and treaty rights holders and Indigenous organizations in the city to talk about our draft principles and vision statement on Chapter 1. And we will continue to have discussions on Chapter 1 in this fall, again, leading up to final reports, staff recommendations in early 2023. Thanks, Kristen. Back to you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And it's a good lead into our final question. So we'll go back to, we'll go to the next slide, but we're going to go to Mentimeter again. So if you have your smartphone or the desktop application open, Jeff mentioned that we are going to be having some continued engagement leading up to the early 2023 timeline and more engagement on that draft vision and directions or chapter one. So how would you like to continue to stay involved in Our Plan Toronto? Is that through virtual meetings like this, in-person pop-ups, like smaller scale pop-ups, e-bulletin, so a newsletter that would come to your email that would provide updates and information through the website, updates, story map updates. So that's our virtual kind of our online tool with maps and data to learn more information, or on social media. You can click all that apply here. So we have some for virtual meetings, some for in-person pop-ups, and one for social media. And I see a few more responses rolling in there. This one for e-bulletin. Okay, thanks for your input there. One for story maps. Okay, thanks so much. And we will go back to the slide deck now. Thank you everyone for participating in the polling. It's really helpful for us to hear from you and get your feedback. So tonight we had our Neighborhoods and Complete Communities policy themed meeting, but we have one more tomorrow, tomorrow evening, same time, 5 till 7 p.m. and that's on housing and intensification, where we'll get into inclusionary zoning and the MTSA work. We also have story maps, which I see being linked in the chat that you can check out. One provides kind of an overview of some of the information Jeff presented tonight on the draft directions and vision. And there's another one on the MTSAs, PMTAs that you can check out as well and provide feedback on a particular station. So we'll go to the final slide. So first of all, just a big thank you to everyone this evening for sharing all of your thoughts with us today and asking all your questions. Some really interesting questions were raised tonight and really thought-provoking. So really appreciate that from everyone. We heard a lot about access to food and places, affordable housing, tree protection, conditional upzoning, the goal of an inclusive city, and opening up our neighborhoods and the relationship with opening up our neighborhoods to more housing. We heard about complete communities and making actionable commitments to meet our goals, and many other things that were raised this evening. So thank you so much. Please stay in touch and we'll hopefully see you soon.